You wrote that down. Okay, good.
So if we get all emails,
8. Okay. Gotcha.
Ian, are you ready to get started?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Need to ask and make sure that that microphone is on at the podium. Hey, Ian, can you check and make sure the microphone is on at the podium?
Check. All right, thank you all for your patience. Normally we get started right at 5:15. I'll call this meeting to order. This is the January 10th, 2019 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan, and I'm the chairman of this commission. I would like to remind all the commission members and those in the audience, if you wouldn't mind silencing your electronic devices. For the commission members, I'd like to remind you to turn your microphones on, as well as city staff to turn your microphones on when speaking so it can be recorded and heard throughout the audience. For those of you coming up and speaking this evening, we'll ask that you come to the podium and speak into the microphone. You can raise and lower it as you need to, as well as you state your name and address for the record. With that, we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Aaron Wiseman, 3rd Ward City Council.
Dale Vaughn.
Mike Lester.
Jack Deacon.
Penny Quigg.
Ann Strotman, city staff.
Dean Dutoy.
Blake Marcus.
Hank Vogt.
Bunny Tricky Cotton.
Eric Barron, city staff.
Ian Zollinger, city staff.
Sonny Sanders, city staff.
Brian Wolford, city staff.
Anna Naniski, city staff.
Shane White, city staff.
Thank you. City Code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of a regular member. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to conduct business. This evening, we have 2 regular members who will be absent. That is Michelle Mahoney and Chris Yarnell. We do not have any alternates who are absent. Is there any members who will be disqualifying themselves from any voting agenda item tonight? I'm seeing none. So the voting members this evening will be Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Dean Dutoy, Michael Lester, Blake Marcus, Dale Vaughn, Hank Vogt, and Penny Quigg. As a side note, we do have 2 members that are going to be leaving us early this evening. Blake Marcus will be leaving somewhere around 6 o'clock, and Bunny Tricky Cotton somewhere in that 6:45 range, and we will watch that based on agenda items. Next, I will have a call for cases. If there's someone here to present those cases, if you would just raise your hand at this time. Our first case is case number P19001, 311 and 320 Hoover Road. It is a rezoning from PUD to M1 and a comprehensive plan amendment. Thank you. Our next case is case number P19002, 612 East McCarty Street. It is a special exception permit. Is there someone here? Thank you. Our last case is case number P19003, 1500 Timber Trail. It is a special exception permit. Is there someone here? Thank you. Eric or Ian, have we received any requests for continuance?
No.
Have we received any requests for reordering or any changes to the agenda?
We do have 2 items we would like to add to the agenda under other business. So currently under business, just as the staff updates on prior cases, we would like to add designation of a representative to the Historic Preservation Plan Focus Group. We'll describe what that is at that point on the agenda. And then also update on the comprehensive plan project that we're pursuing. So those 2 items.
Very good. Those are both staff issues.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we'll hear the format of the hearing and order of testimony. Ian, will you please let us know about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the commission. The proceedings of the meeting are being recorded, so please step forward to the microphone when you speak and give your name, address, and address for the record. The standing order of each case is as follows. After the introduction of the request by city staff, the applicant or their consultants will provide information on the request. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes unless additional time is granted by the commission. The applicant shall have 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if requested. We will then ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will then ask to hear from opponents of the request. We will then ask to hear from anyone else who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes each unless additional time is granted by the commission. City staff will then make their recommendations on the request. In order to reduce the time necessary to hear an application, reference to printed material, including staff reports, applicable findings, shall not be read into the record unless directed by the commission. The commission will then close the testimony from the floor. The commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive. That is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will be taken in favor. The final vote will be taken with ayes in favor and nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the result of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. The following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: the City Code of the City of Jefferson as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of applications under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, the affidavit of publication in the public notice in the newspaper, copies of drawings, plans, and or renderings under consideration, letters or memoranda from staff, staff reports, minutes of proceedings, correspondence or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, rules of procedure for the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protective Services or through the office of the city clerk. Please be advised that any items that are presented, distributed, or otherwise received pertaining to the cases under consideration become the property of the commission. These include any photographs, drawings, petitions, and letters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. We'll move on to the adoption of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda, and I think we ought to state as amended this evening by city staff or the items underneath other business.
So moved as amended.
Second that.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carries 8-0. As we know, last month Eric sat up here and took the place for Miss Ann. So I do believe we have some minutes from last month. I think Ann put the minutes together. But if you would, take a quick minute, look through those. If you have any corrections or changes, let us know. If not, we will entertain a motion.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
I have a motion, a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Communications received. Staff has informed me that we have received one letter of correspondence. It is regarding case number P19003. That has been provided to city staff via email from January 10th. So I'd suggest commission members look at that when we get to that agenda item. We'll move on to new business and public hearings. Our first case tonight is case number P19001, 311 and 320 Hoover Road. It is a rezoning from PUD to M-1 and a comprehensive plan amendment. Ian, if you would, tell us a little bit about this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to point out the location of the property is here. And just some major intersections. We have West Main and Hoover Road. and then also 179 and Industrial and West Truman here. Here we have a zoning map showing the current zoning of the property. The property is currently zoned PUD. Here. And here is a copy of the development plan map of the comprehensive plan. And here's the property. The property was annexed into the city on May 16th, 1967. And at that time, the city's industrial businesses were developing along Industrial Drive and in this area. The 1968 zoning map designates the area as local commercial and light industrial. And in 2003 and 2004, the property was part of the Cherry Creek development. The property was rezoned from M1 to RA2, high density residential. And at that time, I believe they amended the development plan map of the comprehensive plan to reflect that rezoning, as that's what the designation is here today. In 2012, the property was rezoned from RA2 to PUD. Although the property has been rezoned a couple of different times and has been a part of development plans, it has remained undeveloped. Here is a 2015 air photo. It's also the application. The request is involving two different addresses, and so one of the properties is here, and the other here. This one does have a small building on it, and the applicant is here as well as their consultant, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Ian at this point? Seeing none, next we'll ask if the applicant would like to come forward. If you would, please state your name and address for the record, and if there's anything you'd like to add to what city staff has outlined.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Sampson, Central Missouri Professional Services, 2500 East McCarty Street, and I'm here today representing Missouri American Water, who is the applicant on this proposal. Also in the gallery is Mr. Brant Haas, who is the local manager for Missouri American Water, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit after I'm done about specifically what their reasoning for the proposal is. Missouri American Waters recently purchased the property, and their plans are to relocate their operations facility and their office from their current location on High Street to this site. The property is approximately 8.5 acres in size, located at the north end of Hoover Road. As Ian said, it's currently vacant other than a small shop building that's located on the southwest corner of the property next to the Hoover Road cul-de-sac. As Ian explained, the property has had a quite varied history over the last 15 years or so. As he said, it was previously kind of historically zoned for industrial use, early 2000s, rezoned for high-density residential for the Cherry Creek development, which was a complex of, I think, 9 or 10 multi-story, multi-unit apartment complexes. After only a few of the units were built, which are located just to the north of the property, the development went bankrupt, and that was the limit of what was constructed at that time. But also at that time there was max excavation done for the entire property, including the 8.5 acres that's under consideration today, as well as construction of stormwater infrastructure and utilities throughout the entire site. In 2012, the rezoning from the RA2 to PUD was done in anticipation of a senior housing duplex development. Before any construction was really done, the owner at that time decided the project really wasn't financially feasible, so it kind of died at that time. After several years of being vacant and Missouri American looking for a site within their service area to relocate their operations and maintenance facility, they settled on this property, and they actually have purchased that property already. The proposed M1 zoning is necessary to accommodate their maintenance operations mainly, which may include some outdoor storage of materials, pipe, gravel, dirt, that type of thing. That would all be housed in bins located towards the north end of the property. The access to the site would be off of the end of Hoover Road, and it would be completely disconnected from any of the residential properties. There will be some equipment storage there. A lot of that will be done under lean-tos and canopies, or in a garage that would be located on the rear of the property. As far as the adjacent properties go, area to the south is already zoned M1. To the southeast is federal, or the southwest is federal recycling, which is probably one of the heavy-dutiest recycling facilities in town. A very heavy-duty industrial use. To the south east part of the property is, I believe it's a group home of some sort, and there's quite a bit of buffer between there and the proposed property. To the west is all zoned commercial. The city's new fire station, I think number 2, is located there, as well as a water tower owned by Missouri American, and then there's a small commercial development there. The commercial area is separated from this proposed M1 property by a fairly significant slope and an elevation difference of 20 to 25 feet. And then on the north is the property that remains zoned RA2. As you can see, there's, from where the actual apartments are constructed to where the property line is, there's a fairly significant distance there. As we develop the site plan for Missouri American, the plan is to push the development as far south towards Hoover Road as possible. Right now we're just kind of in the sketch phase, and we're looking at somewhere 100 to 150 feet of buffer distance between what would be developed as Missouri American site and their north property line to the residential area. And then on the west, or on the east, is the Riverview Cemetery. Again, we're trying to, as we develop the site plan, we're trying to stay as far away from that east property line as possible. And then you can see there's a large forested area between the property line and where the actual development for the cemetery starts. As we develop the site plan, because there is outdoor storage potentially involved, we'll also be going through the Board of Adjustment for a conditional use permit. At that time, they will look more closely at the buffering and the setbacks from the site to the adjacent properties. We think that, again, because the site is so large compared to the size of the site that they have now, we'll be able to provide more than sufficient buffering and setbacks to the adjacent properties. I think that is all that I've got at this time. I'd answer any questions you might have, and then I'll let Brent come up and talk about why Missouri American needs to do this.
Any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here that would like to present this case? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Brent Haas. I'm with Missouri American Water Company. I'm the local operations manager at 906 West High Street. There's a lot of reasons that are kind of culminating for why we need to vacate the current location and move. A lot of it has to do with the type of investments we're making in town, and it is largely to do with our production capability and our reliability for the city. We invested heavily last year with our new pre-sedimentation basin, and part of that called for us to surrender some of what we used for storage prior to that. And so we had to move a lot of our materials out to the elevated tank that is adjacent to this property. Where it currently is sitting, it is not under roof, and we desperately would like to remedy that, and this is a means of doing that. It would not only give us a place to call home, it would also clean up that site as well. Plans are in the works, but this would include a covered canopy with proper storage to keep those things out of the elements. This year and part of last year, we have been working on a comprehensive study for the reliability of the rest of the components of the plant. A lot of those components are over 100 years old and are needing to be replaced, and those investments are coming. We are evaluating that right now, but a lot of the alternatives analysis we've looked at call for us moving out of the way to accommodate the real estate needed to do that, for the construction. So that, coupled with the storage needs and the fact that we, if you're familiar with our site now, is geographically and topographically kind of limited in what we're able to do, it would allow us to consolidate all of those assets and people at this site and give room for the investments for the plant that are required. So largely that's basically in a nutshell what's going on. I'd be glad to answer any other questions.
Any questions?
So on the current site now, where your office is now, you're going to use that to, or will it be offices still, or is everything going to be moved out that way?
So,
I guess what are you going to do with the site? I know you're going to redo, do some modifications.
Absolutely. It hasn't been decided yet. I can tell you that the folks that are reporting at that location, as well as 221 Brook Street, which is just up the hill from us, will all be moving with us to this facility. What we do with the property that is there now is going to be determined by how we build the new assets for the plant. Some of them that I have looked at have called for the demolition of the building and literally a buried clear well for water storage. So I don't know yet. We're still analyzing those alternatives, but in theory, we're expecting a lot of that land to be used for the new investments for the plant rehab.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll kind of explain the process that we will go through on all three of the cases at this point. After the applicant speaks, we have a three-step process. We have first those who would like to speak in favor of the request. When we're done with that, we move on to those who would like to speak in opposition. And then lastly, we would like to have those that just want to speak. They're neutral, I guess is what you'd say. So anyway, each case will do that similarly, so you know how that works. At this point, we will move on this case to, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? I'm seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name's Tim Theroff. I am the manager of Riverview Cemetery at 2600 West Main. And I guess I just have a question. Is the proposed use a permitted use in the current zoning district?
And we've talked about this, and the proposed use would be able to be accommodated by its current zoning. But like I said in our conversation, that the PUD zoning, although we've seen a lot of PUD plans come forward recently, most recent was the shoe factory. The PUD zoning should be the exception and not the rule, and that we would like to we would want to allow people to use their property within the uses that are allowed by the zoning, and that PUD zoning is intensive and it's the most restrictive, and it would require the property owner to come forward with any change that they need to make to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. So to answer your question, it can be done, but it is very burdensome to the property owner. And in this case, the property has been zoned as industrial before, and it could be so if this commission decides to. So, yeah.
And it was zoned RA2 before as well, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, if it's permitted, and as an adjoining property owner who sells peace and serenity, I would, I have no, I'm actually in favor of a little bit of restrictiveness on its use in the future. So I would prefer to see that it remain a PUD.
Any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
Once again, we will ask, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Seeing none. Lastly, we will ask, is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. I'm seeing none. At this point, we will close testimony. Oh, sorry.
Is this my proper time, or do I get a rebuttal section?
What do you want to do?
If they request a rebuttal, they get one.
Okay.
All I would like to say is...
Name and address.
Oh, Paul Sampson, CMPS 2500 East McCarty Street. Just to kind of reiterate what Ian had said, especially for a facility like the water company's maintenance operations facility, the PUD would be terribly burdensome. By the PUD rules, every time they decided to move a bin of material, move a storage shed, add another spot to put gravel, that would technically have to come back to the city council. So from operations of their facility, the PUD would be very burdensome. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. At this point, is there anyone, well, at this point we will close testimony. Ian, I'll ask for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are two requests being presented. The first is the comprehensive plan amendment, and the second is the rezoning request. It says, while the development plan map of the comprehensive plan calls for this property to be medium density residential, this was the result of several rezonings in the early 2000s to accommodate a growing housing market. The proposed amendment to the development plan map of the comprehensive plan would allow the property to return to its historic designation and to be rezoned for a more compatible use. Staff recommends approval of the request to amend the development plan map of the comprehensive plan to show the property as industrial. And the requested, the rezoning request, the requested industrial zoning would be a benefit to the area and allow for the property to be developed in a manner similar to neighboring properties. And staff recommends approval of the request to rezone the property from PUD to M1 light industrial.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Ian? I'm assuming Mr. Wade does not have a report on this evening. Okay. Any questions for Ian or other city staff from the commission members? Ian, I have two questions for you. One is, the applicant stated that they were going to stay approximately 100 feet off the adjacent properties to the north and east, with different zonings from M1 to a RA2 or RS2. What is the requirement by city code of a buffer yard, buffer distance? And then the applicant has stated that they will have outdoor storage. And with that being said, is there any kind of regulations as far as buffering, as far as outdoor storage, as far as privacy fences or screenings for that?
I will answer the buffer yard question. A type C buffer yard would be required, and that can include a 50 feet open space buffer, or a large canopy of trees, 3 per 100 linear feet, or natural buffer area of 35 feet. So a type C, which is the largest of the buffer yards, would be required.
And I'll try to answer the second half and kind of reiterate some of what Ian said. Of course, in Jefferson City, our terrain is so varied. Even in the presentation by the applicant's consultant reference, and the flat air photo doesn't do it any justice. The the property sits at kind of a mid-level between the property to the west of it and the property to the east of it. And so the zoning code does have buffer yard requirements within it. Ian read out some of those numbers, that there is a requirement for a certain separation. The property owner has several options on what to choose on what that consists of. It can be anything from I forget, a 35-foot wide strip with a row of trees and a fence in it, to a 50-foot wide strip of open space. But in general, we see buffer yards consisting of trees and fences. However, in cases where it would have no effect on the screening of the site, then they're not required. So literally, there's not a buffer yard fencing requirement at the bottom of a hill when the property next door sits up above the fence. Things like that. The question regarding outdoor storage. Yes, it has to be screened, again, from neighboring property. Again, that's with a fence, and so if the neighboring property sits up above it, you're going to see over that fence. But there is a screening requirement for that. When looking at this property, really the place where that would have the most impact and really make sense would be on the north side, where there's an adjacent residential development. And then this being an outdoor storage use, we would expect there to be a screening fence there to shield that view to some extent. The applicant's representative also referenced to the Board of Adjustment. And so just to make sure that this is clear for everyone, the land use category that this type of use falls into is what we refer to as a contractor trade shop, basically a utility site. In the private sector, it's usually the various trade groups or something, be it plumbing or electrical, that tend to have uses very similar to this. But basically, it's we call it a contractor trade shop. And the zoning code divides that use up into 3 different categories. Contractor trade shops with only indoor storage, being located in a warehouse or something like that. Contractor trade shops with indoor operations and outdoor storage, so they have a warehouse or something to store most of their stuff, but they have a laydown yard. And contractor trade shops with outdoor storage and operations. And so those are usually the heavier equipment type of uses, where you have heavy equipment and large amounts of outdoor stuff and operations being taken place outdoors. I believe what the consultant was referring to is that it will fall into that category, that last one I read, which is a conditional use of the M1 district, which would put this in front of the Board of Adjustment for conditional use permit review. And so they would have to develop a site plan and present that to the board. To be quite honest, it's very similar to a PUD process, but it just has that, the purpose of that is to make sure that negative effects of this particular use are not, do not fall too heavily on surrounding property, and if any conditions need to be put in place to make sure that that does not occur, that's the option that the board has. I hope I've shed a little bit more light on that and answered some of the questions. Certainly be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you both. Do any other commission members have any questions? Okay. At this point, I think we've had the city staff report. We're on to the point if someone would like to make a motion. I think city staff has outlined that we have 2 different motions. The first one would be the amendment to the comprehensive plan, and finally the rezoning of the property from PUD to M1.
I'll move to approve the comprehensive plan amendment request to show the property as commercial on the development plan map of the comprehensive plan.
I have a motion. Second. We have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion carries 8-0.
And I would move to approve the request to rezone the property from PUD to M1.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion carries, both motions carry 8-0. They will be forwarded to the City Council.
February 18th.
February 18th in this room.
Yes.
At what time?
6 p.m.
So there will be another public hearing regarding this at that time, if anyone would like to come to that meeting. Blake, you think you just want to jump out here between cases? Okay. At this time, we will announce that Blake Marcus is leaving. We still have plenty of commission members to continue on, so we will do that. Thanks for coming. Next, we will move on to case number P19002, 612 East McCarty Street. It is a special exception permit. Ian, are you going to tell us a little bit about this?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to go over the history of the short-term rental ordinance. Although it was a year ago that it was passed on January 2nd, 2018, it's still fairly new, and we've only had a handful of applications so far. The ordinance was passed, like I said, January 2nd, 2018. The purpose was to establish it as a special exception use that would require a special exception permit, and to define specific use standards. The new section of City Code outlines a couple of items for the Commission to look at when approving these special exception permits, mainly the type of short-term rental, whether it is the whole home or a rental space or both, signage, parking, and that the special exception use does not allow for the property to be used for receptions, parties, or weddings. It is important to note that the special exception permit does not stay with the property. For example, if the home was sold, the permit is no longer valid, and the new property owner will have to go back through this process if they wish to continue to use it as a short-term rental use. With that, though, I would like to introduce this request, 612 East McCarty Street. The property is located here, just northwest of the intersection of Lafayette and McCarty. And here is Highway 50. And City Hall is just over here. So it's just down the street. The zoning, here's the zoning map, and the property is zoned RA2, as well as the property exists within the newly designated historic district, the School Street Local Historic District, for your information. And here is an air photo of the property. It has, it does have two frontages on McCarty Street, as well as Hanley Way, East Hanley Way, an alley to the rear. And the applicant is here if you have any questions, and I can answer any questions as well.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Ian at this point? Shane, I'm assuming, once again, you have nothing on this? Thank you. Any questions for Ian or other city staff from the commission members? Okay. If the applicant would, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. Tony Smith. My wife and I, Jenny, live at 1211 El Marine, Jefferson City, Missouri. We acquired this property in 2011 and renovated it. Kept it in the historic character of the neighborhood as it originally was. And in 2016, we received a Golden Hammer Award from the Historic City of Jefferson on renovating a property and keeping its historic character. That was followed up with a 4-page article, and if I'd known I was going to be making a presentation like this, I would have brought you copies of it, but it wasn't the city magazine, but it was one of their quarterly magazines. It had pictures of the property and how the interior looked and what we had done and how we'd kept the 1907 quality of the home when it was built. All the woodwork, all quarter sun fireplace mantle, which is beautiful. These things go for well over $1,000 in the city. We spent months rehabbing that thing because it had been painted. But the home was also on the Historic City of Jefferson Homes Tour in 2017 as one of 5 properties that had been rehabilitated and received awards from the Historic City of Jefferson as a historic home. So that's still the character of the home. We have it rented presently. We have a renter now who intends to be there through July 15th at least. But we were looking forward to the prospect that if we lost our current renter, that we would go to a Airbnb process where we would just rent the home a few times a month. And it is a single-family home with 2 bedrooms. It has a basement, and there is a side property that we acquired that's 614, which is a vacant lot. It has a garden on it right now. I don't know what else to tell you. I think it's in a perfect location for people coming to Jefferson City and being involved in all the city events that we have, downtown. It's also in a great location for people coming to the Lincoln campus for football games or special events, I would think. Plus, there seems to be a market for people just looking for homes like this if they're traveling around through the country, they just stop and they'll rent a home like this for a night. And that's our intent.
All right. Is there any questions for the applicant from the commissioners? Thank you, sir. At this point, we'll ask, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak in favor of this request? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Please come forward. Seeing none. At this point, I'm assuming the applicant has nothing else they'd like to add. We will close testimony. Ian, I will ask for your staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff recommends approval of the proposed special exception permit. The property is capable of meeting the specific use standards for a short-term rental as outlined in the city code.
That's all you got for me?
Yes.
Okay. Do any of the commission members have any questions for city staff at this point? Yes.
What is the maximum length of time it can be rented, number one? And number two, could they go from a long-term rental, say 6 months to a year, and then go back to short-term and then go back to long-term? Or is it just strictly a long-term like a regular rental we always have? Or to go with the short-term, can they have both?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the maximum length of time on the Airbnb?
Well, the Airbnb, the short-term rentals are defined as less than 30 days. And so if really the ordinance is used to regulate those rentals as he described are either for a day or two or a week, really someone can rent their property for months at a time. But before the ordinance, they could not rent it for less than 30 days. And so it up to 30 days.
Any other questions for city staff from the commission members? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the request for a special exception permit for a short-term rental.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? This motion carries 7-0. Ian, if you would, will this be forwarded to the city council, and what process is that?
Yes, the city council is the final decision maker on your recommendations, and that will be February 18th. That is a Monday here in City Hall at 6 p.m.
In this room?
Yes.
And it is, once again, a public hearing?
It is a public hearing, yes.
Okay. Very good. Motion carries. Will be forwarded to the city council. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to our last case this evening. It's case number P19003. We're doing okay on time, aren't we? 1500 Timber Trail. It is, again, a special exception permit. Ian, tell us a little bit about this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property is located here. The nearest intersection is Veith and Cedar Hills Road. And also Veith and Route C down here, just to orient you where it is. The property is zoned RS2, residential. And here is an air photo of the property. The property has frontage along Timber Trail here and Timber Lane. And the property owner is requesting a special exception permit for the short-term rental of the entire home, as well as a short-term rental of the rental space. I would like to note that those would not be able to happen at the same time, only when they are away for any period of time could they rent the entire house out. But if they are living there in the home, they would only be able to rent the rental space. Yeah, and a rental space can be a bedroom with maybe a living room area, and that is what is a rental space in the code. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here to present as well.
Okay. Shane, once again, nothing this evening? Thank you. Any questions of city staff at this point from the commissioners? All right. Is there someone here who'd like to present this case? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Julie Glaser. I live at 1500 Timber Trail in Jefferson City. I am the homeowner. I've lived there for about 5 years, have done significant renovations on the property, including a lot of external curb appeal type renovations, including a new driveway, new garage doors, new retaining wall, landscaping, that kind of thing, and then as well as a complete interior renovation as well. My husband, ex-husband now, we bought the property together. We've since been divorced, so I'm now a single mother, and was looking for different, some ways to supplement my income. And time is a factor, so getting a second job was not necessarily an option, but I thought, I've got an extra room in the house. This is becoming more popular, with the Airbnb. People are, vetted and background through that process. A lot of the people that I've known that have done Airbnbs, they have a lot of professionals that come into town and just want a one-night rental, or if they're visiting family, that kind of thing, and thought that might be a good way to help supplement my income when the children are gone, for example, at their dad's. So you can choose the dates in which you want to rent the property. You don't have to just open it up and let people come into your home at any time. And so anyway, I thought that would be a good way to help me supplement my income on occasion whenever I'm estimating maybe, a couple to a few times a month at maximum. I mean, it is a lot of work, I know, to host people in your home. It's just like you have visitors over, you want everything to be just right. So I don't anticipate it being a frequent occurrence, but thought it would be a nice option to have in case the the kids, like I said, were at their father's home for a weekend, or if they go on vacation maybe with him or something like that. Let's see. I think, I did have one neighbor that approached me who happened to be actually beyond the 185 feet notification buffer radius, and she expressed concern that she had a rental property next to her home, which that property is a little bit on the, it looks like a rental property, basically. It's not very well taken care of, and I think that was a concern as well. And I don't know that I know I do have some opposing neighbors here to oppose this tonight, but I'm not sure that they understand exactly what an Airbnb is, and that I'm not going to be leaving or, and just renting the property out for anybody to move into. I mean, it's my home, it's my children's home. I'm obviously going to keep it up. It's much like a B&B, I guess you could say, a bed and breakfast inn, if anybody has ever been to one of those. And I guess that's really all I have to say about that.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions from the commission members for the applicant at this point?
I just want to reiterate, so you just plan on renting a space in the house while you're there currently?
Yes. Ian did ask me about that, to clarify that, and I asked if there was really a difference in the application process, if you're going to rent the whole house or rent a space, a room, and there really isn't. I mean, it still goes through the same process. I don't anticipate that at this time. I mean, that's not to say, it would be nice to have that option. If maybe I'm out of town for the weekend when the kids are gone, then maybe it would be acceptable. And from what I understand, there's a 4-person maximum. Is that correct, Ian? On a whole house rental?
A four-person maximum of unrelated people and any number of unrelated or related people.
Oh, of related people. Okay. But I would be very wary of doing that, just because I'd really want to. I'd want to be there when other people are in my home, basically.
Any other questions for the applicant from the commission members? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Once again, we'll move along with those in favor, those opposed, and those that would just like to speak. So the first thing we'll do is ask, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, if I may, a short-term rental of a residence, a maximum of 5 unrelated persons or any number of persons related by blood, marriage, or adoption shall be permitted as lodging guests. Not 4, it's 5, just for clarification.
I guess if we're talking semantics of the ordinance, going back to the question, is this commission allowed to restrict the type of use, as the applicant has said she kind of was wavering whether she would do it when she's there or possibly when she's not there, and then she also stated that she would like to do this a couple of times a month. Are we allowed to say, okay, this could happen X many times a month?
No, I believe this body can only approve or deny the request. Any other restrictions on short-term use is governed by the city code.
Okay.
And the request is twofold for both the short-term rental of the entire residence and the short-term rental of a single room, like if someone is renting out a bedroom typically. And so unless one of those is retracted by the applicant formally, then this body is basically ruling on both of those at the same time.
So the applicant could ask for one or the other or both? Or is it purely just asking for the permit underneath the code?
Yes, that's correct. You could approve as to one and deny as to the other feasibly if that was this body's choice.
Okay. Once again, we will go back. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to come forward and speak in favor of this request? If so, please come up and state your name and address for the record. I'm seeing none. Next, we will ask, is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening to the Planning and Zoning Commission and also to the city staff. My name is Martha Kleindienst and I live at 1520 Timber Trail. On my street we have a number of retirees, two of whom are widows. As with all seniors, most of our investment is in our homes. In talking with a realtor, I was told that a bed and breakfast could potentially devalue our homes. He even went as far as to say he would not buy a home in a neighborhood where there was a B&B. 18 months ago, I lost my husband, and I am trying to do everything I can to maintain my property. Short-term rentals, or B&Bs, as they are called, are very different than traditional B&B breakfast operations, and so are the clientele. They are geared toward young adults. Nothing against young adults, but again, this is a quiet neighborhood that consists of many seniors. Many, like myself, have lived there for decades, and we value the peace and quiet in our neighborhood. That's why we moved there, and that's why we continue to live there. Of the 17 homes in our neighborhood, 6 have working families. Of these 6 families, 2 families have college-aged children who are away at college. 2 singles, 1 is occupied by a couple with no children, and only 1 family on our street who lives on the corner of Cedar Hill and Timber Trail have small children. The 11 remaining homes are occupied by seniors. I anticipate traffic will pose another problem. This is not a through street where motorists pass to get to their destination. The only people living on this street live on the street. That won't be the case if you approve this business. Traffic will increase, and I suspect many of the clients of this business will be distracted drivers as they try to locate the right house. Distracted drivers here is more risky than normal, as our street is essentially on a loop, which requires motorists to almost constantly turn. The increases of the risk of the business clients hitting parked cars in the street are worse. And I just learned from Ian just now that a party of 5 people could rent the home and then come in and have a party. I know that this is not an event center, but if a group of 5 people come in and rent it, other people could come in and party. And this could be a disturbance in the neighborhood. The applicant of this special exemption permit has disregarded city code in the past. Several neighbors, including myself, have called the city repeatedly regarding dogs running freely in the neighborhood. This should be on record with the city. If the applicant disregards city code as a homeowner, it stands to reason she could do the same as a business owner. Who from the city is going to supervise this operation? Because if this business is approved, we will expect it to be strictly follow city code. Is this permit strictly for the applicant, which I think has already been answered, and it cannot be transferred? We respectfully ask that this special exemption permit be denied, not because we are anti-business or anti-growth, but because we are supporters of small planned urban development. It just doesn't make sense to put this type of business in this type of neighborhood. All of the above could perhaps be a moot point because of the warranty deed associated with the lots sold when this subdivision was established by Harold and Irene Krieger and Virgil and Francis Reed. I have copies of the warranty deeds for our lot for the council that I will pass out. The warranty deed says in part, said lot shall not be used directly or indirectly for business of any character or for any purpose other than that of an exclusive residence for one family, except that this shall not prevent a physician or dentist from having an office in his or her home, if said home is primarily used as a dwelling place. When the subdivision was being developed, we purchased 2 lots. I have the warranty deed to both lots, and they both say the same. I am sure that when the subdivision was developed, that the Kriegers and Reeks presented the same warranty deed to all parties who bought lots. I have also a copy of all the lots in the subdivisions to whom they were sold. In calling Cole County abstract, I was told that the warranty deed established when the subdivision was developed is still in effect today. So because of the warranty deeds and because of the above things that I have mentioned, I am totally against approving any type of business like this in our neighborhood. And the neighbors in my back row also feel the same. These are the warranty deeds for the lot that our home is placed on.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. How many additional vehicle trips per day do you envision this B&B to create? In other words, you know, so if she rents this room out, how many trips per day do you imagine to see a car coming and going?
Well, I think that, not to be sarcastic, but that's to say how long is a piece of string, because it all depends upon, you know, who rents this.
Well, you're the one that brought it up. You're the one that said it would be excessive, so you must have a concept of how much you're talking about.
Well, the fact that there could potentially be a group of 5 people renting the facility, you could have, from what Jan has told me earlier, you could have 25 people in the house. You know, so you could have a potential of 25 cars going up and down the street. If a party of 5 people are just coming in as a family, you know, and they're in town to sightsee, they could be going up and down the street 3 or 4 times a day. You know, since she's not serving breakfast there, they could go out for breakfast. They could go out and come back home, go out for dinner. You know, or if they're visiting or sightseeing or doing business, they could, you know, maybe 2 or 3 times a day.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that, you know, my biggest concern is, like I said, the covenant says no businesses. And the other thing is I'm trying to do what I can to keep my property up because, you know, I don't know 5 years down the road if I'm going to have to sell my home to be in a nursing home or whatever. And I sure don't want my property to be devalued. I'm hoping to keep, you know, having it painted and landscaped and things to keep it up, the value of the property up.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Don't run off on me. I got another question for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Would you rather have a house of renters there and a family of 5 or 6 people rent the house? Would that be your preference?
Well, I think if you had a family that is renting a home, they're going to be, I personally feel that they're going to be more responsible.
I don't think that bears out around the city. Normally, renters don't take care of things in most parts of the towns I've seen. But that's just my experience with Airbnbs has actually been quite extensive because we travel with one of our daughters to help with her children. 5 times in the last 4 or 5 months we've been in it, 3 times. And They are really well kept up. They are scrutinized both by the company. If the house is bad, they can't rent it, they're struck off the list. If the people are bad, they're struck off the list. If you have renters in your neighborhood, you're going to have a mess. I find that it's a lot more protection to have a short-term rental, because so many people are looking at it to make sure it's going well, than have renters come in and I haven't seen a neighborhood yet where they want renters in there. That's just in my own perspective.
Right.
Maybe you've seen a lot of good renters, but I haven't seen any good renters.
I also had been in contact with I think it's a Bed and Breakfast Association of Missouri, and they said that if you are associated with them, that they screen and do background checks on those people. And I wonder if Julie plans on doing that, doing background checks on people that's coming in and renting. And
all this is highly regulated by the companies that do it. There's a lot more protection for the Airbnb, both the renter and the people that own the house, than there is on any renters coming in.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I just feel that we don't.
I understand your concerns, but
it's a retired community, and we would prefer to keep it that way.
But there could be people come in, 5 houses could sell with a whole bunch of kids, and they're running wild. And time goes on, and the only way you control it is buy up all the houses. I mean, that's just the way it is anymore.
Yeah. Well, we do have a covenant that says no business, so.
Any other questions?
Yes.
We got one more.
Would you feel that the improvements that have been made to this home would have enhanced your property value in any way?
I don't know. On the inside, I don't know what improvements have been made.
Well, she stated that she'd made some curb appeal type of improvements.
Well, yeah, we all have. We all have. But the fact of the matter is that it's still a bed and breakfast. I mean, the neighbors on the back row, we're all trying to maintain our property and doing landscaping. And I just this last summer had my house painted, and I have lawn care service now to maintain the lawn because I can't do it anymore. And so we're all doing improvements to our home and trying to maintain it. But the fact of the matter is, it's still a B&B in the neighborhood.
Any other questions? Thank you. Nope, you're fine. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Dan Reed. I live at 1530 Timber Trail. Lived there since 1986. I just want to say that I share Martha's concerns about the rezoning, and I'm totally against it, actually. Maintaining the value of my home is extremely important to me, of course, as it is to all of us. But as Martha mentioned, rezoning in the short-term rental, as a short-term rental, could very well result in devaluation. I'm also concerned about the influx of people in the neighborhood and the additional traffic this rezoning would probably bring. The reason we chose to buy a home in the Timber Trail area 30-some years ago was because of this peace and quiet and a very nice residential area. We became acquainted with all the neighbors and had no qualms about letting our kids ride their bikes and wander around. My grandkids visit occasionally, and I hope the neighborhood could keep those qualities, not only for them, but for other families who may decide to buy a home in the area. So, thank you for listening, and any questions you've got?
Any questions for Mr. Reed? Thank you, sir. One thing I would like to quantify is, just for the record, is it's not a rezoning, it's just a special exception permit.
Okay.
Terminology, just so you understand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Again, I will ask, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Brenda Probsting. I live at 1506 Timber Lane. If you're looking at the picture right up there, I live at the end of that dead-end road. My house is right there, and I look out my front window right into Julie's house. That's really the only house that I look at. You can see the gentleman who presented earlier, that's like apples and oranges here. Where his home is, he doesn't live there. It's in a very different climate, it's a place where people would come to sightsee. It doesn't have a neighborhood associated necessarily with it. It's on a kind of it's a historic building. I'd like to stay in your place, quite frankly, and I have stayed in Airbnbs. I understand them quite well. But I know that this use permit does not guarantee that this will always be done through an Airbnb business. This is a choice that Julie's making at this point. However, Airbnb is something fairly new. There may be a time in the future when she would decide that she didn't want to do Airbnb. So the concept Airbnb is just something new. But those of us who chose to live here, I moved from St. Louis in 1986. I located right there because I was close to Cedar Hill School. We had 2 little boys. I worked for the Jefferson City School District. And tell you the truth, we could have moved, at certain points. But we didn't want to. It's a gem, this neighborhood is. And thank you for Jefferson City for providing places like this for people to live. It's almost as if we're in a rural area that has all the advantages of a city. We're close to good schools, we're close to good churches, we're close to shops, we're close to medical facilities, yet we have this privacy and we have this protections of the city and all the advantages that city living will give you. So this is where some of us become a little concerned, I would say, because there's a quality of life that we've had there for over 30 years. Our house was built in 1970, which might be before a lot of you all were born. I don't know. But 1970. That's when it was zoned residential. I believe it might have been even outside the city limits before then. And so people, as they chose to live there, which I looked at our neighborhood a little different than Martha did, I looked at how many people in that residence have lived there for 30 years. How many people have lived there for 20 years? How many people have lived there for 10 years? And the majority of the people in that neighborhood have lived there for 30, 20, 10 years. So you see, this is not a transient type neighborhood. So the climate and the culture of this neighborhood does not really fit with the intention of use. And so that's why I want to bring to your attention the idea that this necessarily does not fit. I have stayed, like I said, in Airbnbs. The places that I've stayed in them have not been like this. They have been areas which would lend themselves more to that kind of a situation where people would kind of be coming and staying. I understand the need for income, and I do know that that's an issue. I've also known people, you asked the question earlier, sir, about would you prefer having a rental? Somebody asked that. But a house this size, if it was going to be rented to somebody, would rent for a large amount of money. So we would assume that the persons who could afford to pay that rental would be doing it 6 months, maybe year lease. They would be able to support that rental. They would be able to pay their rent. So it's a little different than when you come in and you pay because you didn't want to pay what the hotel wanted to ask you, and you're investing very little when you go into an Airbnb, even when you rent the entire home, which was what my husband and I have done on occasion when we've been visiting our children as well. So I just want to bring this to your attention and kindly ask you to deny this permit based on the culture and the climate of the neighborhood. Thank you.
I have a question.
Don't run off on me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead,
Okay.
Dean.
You
Yes.
said you've stayed in a number of B&Bs,
Yes.
and did you respect that property, and were you a good
Oh,
guest?
do you think I would be a good renter?
I don't know you.
I was a teacher. I'm a retired teacher. My
Okay, so-
husband's retired from the state of Missouri. We're
So-
Christian people. We try to treat people nicely. I've tried to be a very good neighbor to Julie, and she's been a good neighbor to me.
Okay, well, my
And-
question was,
yes.
so, based on your answer, you were a good guest,
Yes.
but you think other people are different. They won't
No,
be good guests.
no, sir, I do not. What I am saying is that we're not regulating that here. You guys cannot regulate that, if that's what I understood you to say. All you're doing is giving a special use permit. Beyond that, the only people who will be affected are the people within the neighborhood.
No, but my question went along the lines of, you stay in Airbnbs, and, you know, you are a good guest
Yes.
wherever you are, but yet you have the idea that people coming into your neighborhood will not be good people.
No, I don't think I said that, sir.
Yeah,
I'm
you-
sorry. I did not say that, sir. What I said
Well, not
is
that they won't
this
be good
does
people,
not...
they won't respect the property.
Excuse me, I'm trying to answer your question, okay? I said that this does not fit the character nor the intent of the neighborhood. That's what I said. I didn't say anything negative about Julie nor her future guests.
Actually, I think you did.
Okay. Perhaps
You said people with
we would
long-term
have to
rentals
look back on the record.
have something invested in it. People that come for a short time, they won't care. They don't have anything,
No,
a small amount invested in it.
Okay, well, everybody hears things in different ways.
Okay.
What I meant by that was that when you go and stay in a hotel, there are some people, myself included, who stay in a hotel and respect everything. They try to leave the room nice, they da-da-da. Not everybody who stays in a hotel does that, and I think we would all agree on that. And this is not a lot different. This is just called residential special permission to do short-term rental, which would be in place of someone staying in a hotel, correct? Yeah, so it would be the same type of people, I would assume, that you would have in a hotel or a motel or wherever, you know, people would rent to stay for a short period of time. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thank you for answering my
Thank you.
question.
Any other questions before she runs off? Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Sandra Moreland. I live at 1512 Timber Trail and have lived there since 1986. My home was built in 1979. And I would like to request that we don't have a bed and breakfast on the street. It's not a convenient street to have extra guests. It's steep in front of the house there. It's just a quiet neighborhood. It's been residential. I'm not in favor of having it changed. So that's I'm just asking and saying in favor that I am against it. Thank you.
Okay, don't run off on me. Let's see if anybody has any questions for you. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to come forward and speak in opposition to this request? Okay, I'm seeing none. Next, we will move on to, is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Let me get through that first, and then we'll give you an opportunity for a rebuttal. Once again, is there anyone who would like to speak on this request? Okay, I'm seeing none. At this point, I'll ask city staff if they have any comments And then I do believe the applicant would like to speak, so I'll ask city staff if you have any comments regarding any testimony or anything.
What the applicant, we would ask that the applicant would present their final comments, and then we could do the staff report.
Very good. I'm fine with that. Okay, if you'd like to come forward, again, please state your name and address for the record, and we will see what you have.
Okay, Julie Lazar, 1500 Timber Trail, Jefferson City. I'd like to clarify that this is not, as I mentioned earlier, there is some misunderstanding amongst some of the neighbors that this is a business, that it's a bed and breakfast, and it is clearly not. This is a special exception permit for short-term rentals, and it's not a structured business. Okay, there's going to be no signage. It's not a business. I'm not, filing for a business license or anything of that nature. So it is not a business, which I think is important to note because of the warranty deed that Mrs. Kleinditz presented. She also mentioned that it is a retired community. It is not a retired community. We were not required to be retired people when we bought the house. And granted, there may be some elderly people that live on the street, but it's not a retired community. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. And as far as the frequency, as I mentioned, I don't anticipate this being a frequent occurrence. I'm very busy. I work full time. I, have children, and I don't anticipate at all that there being excess traffic on the street. I mean, quite frankly, the teenagers that come and pick up my daughter to go here or there probably generate more traffic than what any Airbnb would, for that matter, as a teenager that she is. So, thank you for your time.
Don't run off on me. Any questions for Julie at this point? Thank you. I think at this point we will close public testimony. I will move on to city staff for anything they have regarding the case.
So I'd just like to clarify a couple of things that were said and just make sure that we understand the ordinance. The applicant is applying for either a short-term rental of a residence and as well the short-term rental of a lodging room. The maximum amount of people for the short-term rental of a residence is 5 unrelated persons, or any number of persons related by blood, and the short-term rental of a lodging room is the maximum of 1 rental space may be rented to guests. Multiple rentals within the same residence are not permitted. A maximum of 4 people shall be permitted as guests. So the difference between a rental of a residence is you can have 5 unrelated people or any number of people related by blood, and the short-term rental of a lodging room is that you can only have a maximum of 4 people permitted as guests. It does not have the same allowance of any number of people related by blood, so it's just a maximum of 4. And you cannot rent multiple rooms. You can have, it says, again, a maximum of 1 rental space may be rented to guests. Multiple rentals within the same residence is not permitted. So, to clarify that. Also, the property shall not be rented or used for receptions, parties, weddings, or similar activities. And also, the short-term rental of a residence of a lodging room of a residence or lodging room shall be subject to all applicable taxes, including lodging taxes, sale taxes, and business licensing regulation. And although it requires a business license, the short-term rental, a short-term rental, is a residential use. Staff recommends approval of the proposed special exception permit. The property is capable of meeting the specific use standards of those which I read, some of which I read, for short-term rental as outlined in the city code.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Ian or other city staff at this point?
I do. Oh, go ahead.
Bonnie, go ahead.
I was asking our attorney if there were restrictions. I know she provided us with a deed, but what are the neighborhood's restrictions?
The city actually takes no position on what restrictive covenants may or may not be in the deeds there, as that is a private matter between the landowners, and we don't want to interject ourselves in that. Again, our position is that this is a private issue between the neighbors of the residents, and we're not going to give any legal opinion on that.
Okay. Dean, I think you had a question?
My question was very similar.
Turn your microphone on for me, please.
My question was very similar in nature. I'm satisfied.
Okay. Go ahead.
I know it's a short list right now. How many Airbnbs do we have on file with the city? I mean, you don't need an exact number. I mean, is it like 10? Is it 11 exactly? Is it, have we had is the city had very many complaints pertaining to Airbnbs?
No.
No. Okay. And you may have answered this, but I wasn't quite sure. On a long-term rental, if somebody wanted to rent their house out, what's the maximum number of people that could be in that rental? Is there a limit? Is it still 5? Yeah, long term. I mean, in reality, there's lots of people. In reality,
it is the definition of a family, which is the same definition used here in the short-term rental of a residence, a maximum of 5 unrelated persons or any persons related by blood or marriage.
Okay. Yeah, I was asking if we could turn the microphones up in the room. Is that okay? All right. Speak in the microphones better so everyone can hear.
So the definition of a family, as your question was,
would be about 5.
It is the same definition that is used here in the short-term rental of a residence, a maximum of 5 people unrelated or any number of people related by blood.
Okay. And the last question I have is,
speak in the microphone, please.
Sorry. Last question I have is, if there was any issues with the short-term rental and there were complaints, the city could pull the permit.
The permit can be revoked, yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. As it stands right now, should the homeowner decide to go live someplace else, she could rent this property out for periods of time longer than 30 days without asking any permission. It's a use that's allowed for the property, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so really all this does is just define the amount of time.
Yes.
So to me, I'm not an attorney, but that pretty much negates anything in this warranty deed, because if she can rent it out for 31 days, she can rent it out for 29 as long as she has a permit for it. So I just wanted to get this a little clearer in my mind. Okay, thank you.
I would like for it to go on record that Bunny Tricky Cotton is leaving the meeting at this point. Drive safely, Bunny. For clarification, like we started with earlier, Mr. Vaughn's question was, how many Airbnbs do we have in the community at this time? as a commission chair, I do want to state once again, just for clarification, that we're not necessarily approving an Airbnb. I think Airbnb, it gets back to a name like Nike or Adidas or something like that. And obviously, I'm not here to influence the commission or that, but obviously, you know, as we know with technology between Craigslist and things like that, that you could obviously offer this same exception on those services. So I just want to be clear that we're not particularly saying it has to be an Airbnb. I just want to be very clear about that. So with that, I will ask, is there any other questions from the commissioner for city staff? Okay. At that point, we will move forward. I believe city staff has given us their position about a form of a motion. So I open that up to that.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the request for a special exemption permit for a short-term rental.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
I just want to say before I vote that everyone that we have stayed in since, it's been 3 or maybe 4 since August, have been in heavily residential neighborhoods, nice neighborhoods. I haven't been in any of them that have been in industrial district. It's really nice being in the neighborhoods, and I speak with the neighbors and they all love it. So that was my feeling on that. And like the lady said, with the traffic, if you have teenage children, you're going to have a lot more traffic than 2 or 3 people in the house are going to be. Thank you.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion carries 7-6. That's right, sorry. Motion carries 6-0. Once again, it will be forwarded to the city council. That will be a public hearing in this room.
That's correct. February 18th.
February 18th
at 6 p.m.
6 p.m. Thank you all for coming this evening. We will continue to move forward. Next agenda item is other business. I believe staff has updates on prior cases, and then the other 2 items that we amended this evening, correct?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, the updates on the prior cases. The Southside rezoning number 2. So that was staff-initiated rezoning for a significant amount of area there within the South Side, and the City Council did approve that rezoning. So we're 2 steps into the kind of the zoning plan to implement the South Side neighborhood plan. And regarding the Route C and Route CC rezoning, also that one was approved by the City Council. It was a rezoning from a rural or agricultural type of district to a C2, a general commercial district. That's the updates on those, and I'll turn it over to Anna for the other items that were placed on the agenda. Item B is up there. I believe that's the 3rd one, although I'm not sure if we want to do the historic plan designation first.
Okay, so first we're going to talk about the historic preservation plan. This is a pretty exciting project that we're going towards. Jamie Abbott, she's the manager of the Neighborhood Services Division. She's leading that project, and I'm helping her out with it. The historic preservation plan is going to provide like a focus document that will concentrate on the community's unique historic attributes so we can guide any further historic preservation and enhancement that happens in the city. Heritage Strategies is the consultant firm that's being contracted for this project. They're a really nice firm. They've done nice plans for Joplin and Topeka, so we're really excited to have them on. And in gearing up for their first visit, which will be towards the end of the month, we are forming a historic preservation plan focus group, and we believe that we want someone from the the Planning and Zoning Commission to be represented on that focus group as well. You know, just get a well-rounded planning group for that process. The commitment would include going to focus group meetings, attending community engagement events, and then reviewing some of the materials that will end up going into that historic preservation plan. The first focus group meeting will be on January 23rd, sometime during the day. I don't have an exact time for you right now. I apologize, and that is because we're still talking with the consultants on when exactly they're going to be able to arrive that week. But I would like to discuss who we should appoint to that focus group, or if anyone wants to volunteer, that would be great.
So you'd like to see if we could get one member from this commission to attend those meetings? You don't have any idea how many
Correct.
meetings it would be necessarily? Is this a year-long project?
Yeah, the plan will have to be done by August 2019. There's probably 3 focus groups that will need to be attended, and then there's going to be another 3 or so community engagement events.
And once again, you feel those meetings may be during the day, so
At least this first one's during the day.
I was kind of leaning towards the idea of maybe seeing if one of our commission members that's retired. Just looking around at those that are retired.
You'll do it? Okay.
Do we need to make any kind of formal?
I'd kind of prefer that route.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So
we didn't have to arm wrestle for it, which is kind of nice. Dale, thank you. I think what we'll do is, if it's okay, maybe somebody make a motion that, Mr. Vaughn would be our representative, and we'll go down the normal route.
So moved.
Any discussion at all? You can definitely vote for yourself. You cannot vote in opposition. With that being said, there's no discussion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? That carries 6-0. Dale, thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
On a lighter note, I would usually tell Mr. Vaughn that it starts at 1 when it's actually going to start at 1:15 or 1:30.
Really?
Thank you, Dale. Again, do appreciate that in all seriousness. Glad you're doing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so then I have one more update. So we are in the beginning stages of updating our comprehensive plan. As many of you know, the last update happened in 1996, so it is quite outdated, but it's going to be about a 2-year process of us updating this huge, important plan for the city. The Planning and Zoning Commission will have a role in that planning process, but not until a little bit later in that planning process. We're really, really excited about it. It's going to be a really monumental community analysis and community engagement. That's all going into this project, but I'm going to keep you updated along the way. Like I said, it's going to be like 2 years, so we've got a lot of stuff ahead of us. But if you've got any questions regarding the comprehensive plan update, you can let me know, email me, but also keep you updated at these meetings.
Do you hire, do you work with firms and things like that in order to do that?
It's going to be just me updating this plan.
I'm just curious on how that would all work.
Yeah.
If I may add to that, about a year and a half ago at budget time, we presented to the council the idea of let's go outside and hire a firm, and we estimated that cost about $250,000. The alternative was let's hire a staff person to beef up our staff, and here she is.
Was that a one-year budget for her? Is that are you telling her salary publicly?
No, we hope she's here at least until she's vested in loggers. So
I would like to say, and that was a question that I was going to ask Dale. It was a great question that I like to see that we're trying to do some stuff internally. Glad to have her on board. Been here, a few months. A good addition. I do think, as a former planner, it's nice to keep those documents up to date and not just shelve them. As well as, like I said, we're doing it internally, and you take $250,000 and stretch that over a couple years, and she's doing other things, I'm sure, too. So it was a nice idea. It was kudos to the council for thinking that through. Council. Okay. Anything else from city staff on other business?
No.
Okay. Anything else from commission members? We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Almost got a Bueller. Had to wake her up.